So now let me just start with the another locator property, and pose that we can have more time for practice. I will give few other web pages like we can practice in those web page. And the next locator, like we are going to learn, we call it as an XPath. Okay, so assume that like in a specific node we doesn't have ID or name. So what happened, this ID locator will specifically look for an ID attribute, and the name locator will specifically look for an name attribute. If the ID and if the name are not available, and we are having like a different elements, and how we are going to use that elements in the sense only with the help of the XPath. So there is syntax for the XPath, so which we call it as an double slash, okay, tag name square bracket at attribute is equal to, in single quotes, like we can provide the value. So with the help of this XPath, you can use any of the attribute. So we don't have any restriction stating that like it will accept only the ID attribute, it will accept the name attribute. So you can use like any of the attribute. Like in the Salesforce application, like if I right click and inspect this username text box, so in the particular node, apart from ID and the name, so we are having like many more elements. So let's take it is like class is equal to input R4, and type is equal to email, and then Arial describe by is equal to error. So if you are planning to use that elements, so let's say I'm planning to use the element called as an type is equal to email. So in this case, like how I can use this particular element in the sense like only with the help of the XPath. And other thing is like, so whenever you are using ID or name, so make sure the attribute value should be unique. Okay, so whatever the attribute which we are going to use should be unique. And how we can justify or how we can conclude whether the respective attribute value is unique or not in the sense even by converting it as an XPath. So let's say in our coding, like we have used the attribute called as an username, and then we use the attribute called as an password, and then we use the attribute called as an login. So how we can make sure like these attribute values are unique in the sense by converting in a XPath syntax. So as per XPath syntax, like it starts with double slash, and we need to provide the tag name. So what is the tag name? In this node, we are having the tag name called as an input. So I'm just providing the tag name. Then as per syntax, I'm using the notation called as an at, and then we need to like use the attribute. So let's say let us try to use the attribute called as an ID, because like in our coding like we have used the ID, right? So we are going to check whether the ID is unique or not, and suppose that I'm adding the equal to symbol, and in the single quotes I'm going to paste the attribute value called as an username. Okay, so now we have converted it as a XPath syntax. I'm just copying the XPath syntax, and I'm navigating back to the DOM structure, and I'm clicking somewhere in the DOM structure, and then I'm going to do the operation called as an control F. So whenever we click on this control F, at the bottom, like you could able to see some search window will be populating. So where we can find by the string selector or XPath. So now I'm going to paste the syntax inside the particular search bar. So now if you notice, like after entering the syntax, it is automatically highlighting the respective node in the DOM structure, as well as like here we could able to see the option called as an one of one. So the one of one indicates it's an unique attribute and attribute value, which means the ID is equal to username. This element is unique throughout the entire DOM structure. So one and only if something is unique, like we should use it in our coding. So like whatever the attribute value which we have used, which remains to be unique. So for example, like you can cross verify even for this name attribute. So now what I'm doing, I'm just removing the syntax and I'm just right clicking and inspecting this login button. And what is the tag name? It is having the tag name as a input. So I'm just trying to convert it as an XPath. Okay, so double slash. So the tag name we call it as an input. So we are adding the open and close square bracket at what is the attribute we are using here? We are using the name attribute. I'm just using the attribute is equal to name, and I'm specifying the attribute value called as an login. Okay, so I'm trying to use the attribute value. So now if I copy the syntax and if I search, if I do the control F, this search bar will be opening. You can just paste the syntax, and if the syntax is correct, okay, so it's sorry. I have, if you notice, like now it is not throwing any result. The reason is like I have injected the incorrect attribute value. So now I'm just inserting the correct attribute value so that the result will be highlighting. So the match will be found. So now if you see like it is match, it is finding the respective node, and here we could see the result called as an one of one. So whenever the result is one of one, so the attribute and the attribute value is unique across the DOM structure. So which means like we are finding the unique element. So while doing the automation, like we should always provide the unique element. So the reason why we need to provide the unique element in the sense, because if the element is not unique, so let's say, let me just take any other thing. Let me search whether we have the multiple result. And okay, fine. So now let me just take one more attribute. So with the tag name start with a div, and I'm using the attribute called as an, what is the attribute?
You
Yes,
can take
style.
style.
Yeah. So style is equal to something. So as a user, as a programmer, so I thought of selecting this attribute called as an style is equal to display name. But what happened? So when I try to search here, I'm getting multiple result, which means the attribute and the attribute value is available in various node. So let's say like it is available in three places. So like we are using like whenever we traverse one by one, so it is available in this place and this place and in the third place. So as per our scenario, so we need to like click on this second result. But what happened, like generally, so as we are using the method called as an find element, this find element always find the first matching element. Okay, so this find element method will always find the first matching result. Okay, so always, or I can say it always pick the first matching result. So even though, okay, the multiple results are populating, and if you have used this attribute and attribute value in your coding, so by default it will do the respective operation only on the node number one. but as per our expectation, like we need to do the corresponding operation in the node 2. So what happened here is like whenever there is a multiple result, so we are doing the wrong action in the wrong field. So in order to avoid the wrong injection, so like we should always make sure like whatever the attribute and attribute value which we are use in our coding, it should be unique. Okay, so like even if you are using the id or the name, so it should be unique. And apart from the id and name, if you are planning to any other if you are planning to use any other locator property, then we can go ahead with the XPath. So with the help of the XPath, like we can use any of the attribute and attribute value, which means even we can use the id and the name in the XPath syntax. So like if you notice, like here I have used this ID as well as name in the XPath syntax, right? Which means like the XPath will accept all the attribute. And the syntax, we call it as an regular expression of the XPath. And initially, like we have automated the scenario with the help of an ID and with the help of the name, and the same steps can be re-replicate with the help of the XPath. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the steps. So instead of removing the step, like I'm going to comment this step. So I'm just selecting these three lines, and then I'm just doing the operation called as an control slash. So when I do the control slash, so the two forward slash will be added up. So these we call it as an comment line. So in a Java, so whenever there is a comment line, so it will skip those line during the execution, which means like after executing this line number 14, so it won't execute any of the steps because it is marked as a comment line. So you can use the comment line for adding notes as well. So generally in a Java, so the execution will occur line by line. So like as we are going to replace this line with the XPath, so I'm just adding the comment line. And if you need to uncomment it, like you can select it back, and you can just do the control slash. So whenever we do the control slash, like it will be uncommenting, or you can, if you manually add the double slash in front of the particular line, so it will become as a comment line. So I'm just manually adding the comment line. So now instead of automating with the help of an ID and the name locator, I'm going to use the XPath. So let's say we are going to do the automation with the help of the WebDriver, and then like we are using the find element method. This find element method will always find the first matching element. It will always pick the first matching element. So on this find element is a parameterized method. So we are passing the by class, and in which like we are going to use the method called as an XPath. So even the XPath is like kind of an parameterized method where we need to pass a string as a input. So we are passing the regular expression of the XPath over this syntax. So what is the regular expression we have written for the username? So you can copy this regular expression and you can paste the regular expression, and then like you can do the respective action. So I'm going to pass the input. I'm using the senkeys method, and with the help of the senkeys method, so like whatever the input which I'm required, so I'm just passing the input over here. Okay, so like I can even I can do the same thing for entering the password as well. So like I can just right click and inspect, and now in this password, right, like let me try to use this property called as an type at password. So what I can do, so I can create the syntax like double slash. So the as per syntax, we need to provide the tag name. The tag name mentioned here is like input, and then I should use the open and close square bracket followed by at notation. And what is the locator property we are going to use here is like we are going to use the type attribute, and then in the single quotes like we should provide the attribute value. So and then we need to make sure whether this particular attribute type is equal to password is unique or not. How we can verify in the sense, you can copy the syntax and you can come back to the DOM structure and you can paste it over here. So we could see it is like one of one result. Then we can conclude. So this particular attribute and attribute value is unique. So then I can feel free to use this syntax in my coding and I can inject this value with the help of the send keys. Okay, so now if I just run the same script, so even like the script will work, which means with the help of the Selenium, so we can handle the single field with the help of various locator. So whatever the locator the user is comfortable. So like if you are planning to, if the ID is unique, you can go ahead with the ID. If you are planning to use a name, yes, you can use the name. Or if you are planning to use a XPath, yes, please use the XPath. So it is purely so user choice to select any of the locator property. So they can choose any locator. So the end agenda here is like, so whatever the locator property which we are choosing, it should be remains unique. So that is a key point, like we should always have in the mind. So the user can choose any of the locator property. And why Selenium is providing a number of locator property in the sense, in some case, let's say you are trying to use an ID. So even though this ID is unique, it is not entering the input in the text box. So in this case, what you need to do, if ID doesn't work, so you should try out with the other element which is available in the respective node. You can try out with the name, you can try out with the XPath. So for sure, like any one of the locator property will work, because like nowadays, so the web pages are building with the most advanced programming language. So in that case, if any one of the locator property doesn't work, so we should feel free to use the other locator property. So we should not stick with the single locator property stating that like I am trying to use ID but it is not working. If ID is not working, so we may have an other option in the respective node. So pick any other locator which is available and try with the respective locator. So we need to do the cross verification, and whatever the locator property you feel it suits, which is nothing but which is unique, then you can use the appropriate locator in your coding. Okay, so this is the high level introduction about the XPath. But actually, so we are having two types of XPath. So one we call it as an absolute XPath, and other we call it as an okay relative XPath. So generally with the help of an XPath, we are going to find all the elements, and we can find all the elements with the help of two syntaxes. So one is like with the help of an absolute XPath and other with the help of the relative XPath. So this absolute XPath start with the single slash, and this relative XPath start with the double slash. Okay, so and how this absolute XPath work in the sense, it will traverse from head to tail. So what is mean by head to tail? So in order to understand this absolute XPath much better, I am just taking the auditorium as an example. So let's say, let me just open the paint. Okay, so let's say like this is a auditorium. So in an auditorium, so for sure like the chairs will be arranged in the rows and column, like we are having close to 5 rows, and this is the entry point of an auditorium. So assume that like, so your friend is sitting on the fourth row and you need to find your friend. So how you will find your friend in the sense, so you will enter the entry point. Okay, so which we call it as an head. So the entry point we call it as an head. So you will start searching your friend from the entry point. So from the head, so you are going to search your friend row by row. So like you will be searching in the first row. If he is not available, then you will be searching the second row. If he is not available, then in the third row, and in the fourth row, like you're trying to search and you have find your friend. So after finding your friend, so you will stop searching. So the exit point, we call it as an tail. Okay. So like you are going to search your friend row by row. So in a similar way, like you are aware like how the HTML DOM structure will look like. So like we will be having the head tag, and inside the head tag, so all the node are present only inside the body tag. Okay, so only inside the body tag all the nodes will be available. So let's say like we are having n number of nodes. So like node 1, node 2, node 3 and node 4. So let's name some tag name called as an A, B, C and D. Okay. So in our case, like we need to access this node C. Okay, so we need to access this node C so that like we can perform any other operation. So as part of an absolute XPath syntax, we are going to traverse by head to tail. So how in an auditorium we have traverse row by row, here we are going to traverse line by line. So let's say, so initially like we are starting from the head tag. So as the absolute XPath start with a single slash, I can say, so single slash of head followed by we are reaching the body tag. So single slash of body and then followed by, so we need to traverse to this node called as an C. So we are traversing node by node to reach the desired node. So the process of traversing or the process of iterating line by line, we call it as an absolute XPath. So which means like we are traversing from the head and we are reaching to the tail. So how we traversed in an auditorium by row, in similar way like in the backend DOM structure, we are going to iterate from the head of the HTML structure to the required node, which we call it as an tail. So if you write in this way, like we call it as an absolute XPath. So for example, so like this is the username field. If we need to write the absolute XPath for this particular username text box, then how we need to traverse? Like we need to traverse from HTML body to div single slash of div single slash of div single slash of div, then followed by like we need to traverse like node by node. So when we write in this way, like what happened? Like the syntax, the length of the syntax is going to increase. So even though if the length of the syntax is increased, so the functionality wise, like we are able to find the element, right? But in the real time, so we won't use this absolute XPath. So I will tell you the reason. So for example, I'm going to find the absolute XPath for this username text box. So the easiest way to take the absolute XPath is like, so you can click on the respective node and you can right click and you can just navigate to the copy option, and there is an option at the end called as an copy full XPath. So the copy full XPath always give the absolute XPath. Okay, so this is the absolute XPath of the username text box. So like we are traversing from the, sorry, this is a HTML, right? I have written as a head. Okay, so we start with the HTML tag. Okay, and it should be start with the HTML. So which means like we are traversing from the head to tail. So if it travels from the head to tail, we call it as an absolute XPath, and absolute XPath should be written in the single slash. But in the real time, we won't use this absolute XPath. So the reason why we are not using the absolute XPath in the sense, so whenever we use the absolute XPath, it will leads to code breakage. Okay, so what is meant by code breakage? So let's say like they are planning to introduce new field in the UI. So like before this username, so they are adding the text called as an welcome. So whenever they are adding new field or if they are inserting any text which directly indicates like at the back end we are introducing the new node. So whenever the change in UI happen, so like new node will be introduced. So let's say this is the new node, let's call this an J. So as whenever the change in UI occur, the new node will be introduced at the backend. So we may have used the syntax in our coding, but when we try to use this, when we try to run using the absolute XPath, what happened? So it will traverse to the HTML followed by the body, and after A it will check for B. But here we are having J. So which means like as change in UI occurred, like the code breakage has occurred. So which means like we need to manually modify the flow, because like as part of an absolute XPath we are traversing line by line. So we can't modify the coding every time, right? Because like practically in the real time world, so day by day the new update is going to happen in an application, which means like the change in UI can occur more frequently. So as the change in UI occurs more frequently, so we are not using the absolute XPath. Okay, so instead of it, we will be using the relative XPath. But in a real time, we will be using this absolute XPath in few cases, so that I will be explaining in the later part. So why we are not using the absolute XPath in the sense, because like whenever the change in UI occurs, so the change in backend DOM structure occurs, which is nothing but the new node is introduced. So due to introduction of new node, so the regular expression of like absolute XPath get impacted. So due to that, we may due to that the test may fail, the automation script may fail. So that is why like we are avoiding the absolute XPath. And even this syntax we call it as an regular expression. And if you are planning to use this XPath in your coding, yes, you can insert inside the same locator property, because this XPath will accept the syntax of like absolute XPath as well as a relative XPath, because commonly we call it as an XPath regular expression. Okay, so as these absolute XPath have multiple disadvantage, as it is as it is leads to code breakage. So currently like we are going to stick with the relative XPath. So let's take one more example to understand this relative XPath. So let's take example of an delivery agent. Okay. So let's say like you are ordering something in Amazon. So the delivery guy have reached out to your street and he is making a call to you. So stating that like where should I deliver? So you're telling like deliver to the blue color house. So in your street, so there are more than 20 plus houses, but in which like your house is having the unique color called as an blue. Then what the delivery agent used to do, so as we have given the key point, so stating that like deliver come to the blue house, so he will look for the color which is painted as blue. So obviously like it is going to be unique, and he will skip the rest of the houses and he will deliver the delivery to us. In case if there are two blue house, so we can add one more search criteria, so like blue house with black gate. So which means like the delivery agent will look for the search result. So like he will check whether the house is blue as well as the gate is black. So if it is matches, then he is going to deliver the product over here. So how we are making the delivery agent to deliver the product based upon the search result, which means like we are providing few hint in similar way like in the relative XPath. So whatever the syntax which I have discussed already, so we call it as an relative XPath. Here we are specifying the attribute and attribute value. So what happened, like it will search that specific attribute and attribute value in the entire DOM structure, and it doesn't care about the introduction of new node. So how the delivery agent doesn't care about the other houses. So here, like the relative XPath will specifically stick to the condition which we have mentioned. So whatever the attribute and the attribute value we have mentioned, so they will be searching the search result in the entire DOM structure, and wherever the search result matches, it is going to perform the respective action over there. Okay, so like how the delivery agents bypass the other house and he is delivering to the unique house. In similar way, like we are finding the unique element with by providing the unique attribute and attribute value. So when we write with the help of the syntax called as a double slash tag name square bracket at attribute is equal to in single quotes attribute value, so we call it as an relative XPath. So in a real time, like we are going to use the relative XPath. Okay, so this is the high level introduction of the XPath. So like moving forward from the next session, so like we can see more and more practical implementation of the XPath, and you will get a clear picture in which case like we will be using an ID, or in which case we will be using the name and the XPath, and still we are having many locators. So like we will be discussing one by one. So till this point, does anyone have any doubt?
So I have one doubt.
Hmm.
We have used type as an tag name in
Type
one of the examples. Type.
tag name as a type.
Uh, no, so in one of the XPath, I
Hmm.
guess we have used
The attribute as a type.
sorry, attribute as type,
Hmm.
and which is not listed in the locators. So
Hmm.
is it okay?
Yeah, that is what I told, right? With the help of the XPath, so we can find all the elements, which means like we can use any of the attribute. So we don't have any restriction. So whereas in case of an ID or name, we are having the restriction like we should use only the ID attribute and we should use the name attribute. Whereas in XPath, we don't have any restriction. You can use any attribute.
Okay. And one more thing,
Hmm.
I am not getting that option of copying the absolute XPath.
So basically, it should be there. Like if you just right click and insert, like you need to click on the specific node, right? So did you click on the specific node, and post clicking on the specific node, right click and then click on the copy, and then try to do the copy full XPath. So probably like
Okay,
you can
I
able to see get it. Probably you
okay,
may
I did.
fail to click on it, I
Ah,
guess.
yes, 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 right. I'll try once again.
Okay, guys, so that's the end of the today's session. So, like, still we have 10 minutes of time. So, probably, like, you guys can try it out. And if you have any other questions, so please feel free to highlight.